Consciousness may start before birth. A new theory is shaking up our scientific and philosophical understanding of the human ability to perceive, feel, and think.
What is consciousness?
Today we talk all about the boundaries of consciousness in humans and whether consciousness may one day emerge in artificial intelligence.
Where does it begin?
Scientists, philosophers, and ethicists have studied consciousness for millennia, but today there is no consensus on what it is and when it emerges. The problem is that consciousness defies observation, and we still don't understand much about the brain. That's why leading scientific theories of the 20th century hypothesized that consciousness develops after birth, possibly even as late as a child's third birthday. Today, infant consciousness remains a mystery. We can't test what we can't observe. But it's now the 21st century, and a new scientific theory has emerged with new tools. A recent peer-reviewed study contests the idea that newborns are unconscious beings.
I've had nephews over the last decade, and I've got to observe them, becoming conscious beings and having a personality. But it was interesting to me, because when the second one was a baby, it's like he was a potato. It's like just a spud with no personality at all for the first 2 years. And I was just like, oh, that's like there's no consciousness in there. It's just like this computer baby thing. And then one day I met him, and then it was the personality that was the same personality for the next 8 years. So my feeling was that consciousness came in at 2 years old.
Well, your nephew was probably boring, no offense, but my daughter, when she was 3 months old, she would laugh, especially when I would nurse her. She would just stare at my milk machine and go, and laugh. And it was really funny. She was very aware of my presence, my husband's presence. So I do think she was, someone was home.
Someone was home.
The scientific consensus up until now has mainly stated that it doesn't start till later in life. They call it late onset consciousness, as opposed to early onset consciousness, which is what we're talking about today.
Fascinating.
Studying consciousness in babies is hard because infants can't verbally respond to commands. However, potential markers of consciousness in infancy include reacting to harmful stimuli, visual fixation, and being able to identify the voice of one's mother. The researchers argue that consciousness may emerge during the final weeks of gestation, as in during pregnancy. For the first time, they reviewed markers in brain images of infants that reliably differentiate the presence of consciousness from its absence. Their findings suggest that newborns can integrate sensory and cognitive stimuli to conscious experiences to understand the actions of others and plan their own responses. It's wild to me that until now we've thought that consciousness doesn't start until later in life, because having witnessed it, I really think it starts a lot earlier. And it's also crazy that we used to not even give babies medication to numb the pain if they had surgeries. We didn't do that until the late 1980s.
It's also horrifying because I would hate to think if I was a conscious baby being circumcised and being aware that the doctor's about to cut off a piece of my penis. So I think that maybe it's variable. What if I was one of the ones that didn't have a consciousness until later in life, but some babies do get it earlier?
I think we all have it at the same time. We just have to figure out when that time is.
Well, I'm glad I don't remember my circumcision, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, also they've done studies on children who have been abused as babies or completely neglected, and those children do not develop properly.
Oh, right, like babies that don't get hugged or loved by their parents turn out to be serial killers the most or something.
Or just not having verbal skills or being able to emote. Modern brain scans can't show us what a person is feeling, experiencing, or thinking, but we're getting a little bit closer. Last year, scientists decoded language in the brain using MRI scans and artificial intelligence. This might help people communicate if they can't speak, and one day it might help us learn more about consciousness. I'm really excited to see how advances in neuroimaging, electrophysical technologies, and the emerging field of implanted brain chips are going to advance the study of consciousness.
You mean like Elon Musk's neural link thing?
Exactly like that.
I'm very weary of that, like getting a chip put in your brain. Like, what is the point that you're going to be able to like scroll your Instagram inside your brain and like get an email that pops up? That sounds horrible.
Well, right now that's not the point. Maybe someday we will get there, but for now, those brain chips, I don't know if his brand, but they have helped people who are paralyzed be able to have movement again. They've helped people who are blind be able to see again. There's a lot of really cool things that they've helped improve.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
That was just my first assumption, that it was just like getting a cell phone in your brain.
I mean,
which
that
would be terrible.
probably will come at a certain point, probably even in our lifetime.
So from studying the consciousness in babies and when it arrives, has this had any implications for the consciousness in artificial intelligence?
Well, first of all, this would require a scientific consensus on what capacities function as markers of consciousness in humans, which we don't have yet. And then we'd have to define what consciousness means in computers. Robots don't have brains in the way that we have brains, so it's not like we'd have a neuroethicist looking at this issue. We'd have to come up with a whole different area of ethics, which I believe there are now regarding AI. This is a very complex intellectual and moral puzzle for humans, and it's also been the subject of debate regarding animals, amoeba, plants, and particles. So my favorite essay on this topic is Consider the Lobster by David Foster Wallace. It's about a lobster festival in which he poses the question about what happens when lobsters are boiled for human consumption while they're alive. Lobsters are not conscious according to scientific theories on this issue, but the screaming sound that their shells make while we cook them alive leaves many of us considering the lobster. So it's worth considering the awareness of all beings, especially since the mere idea that AI could become sentient one day affects our current state of consciousness.
Yeah, I had that exact experience one time at the beach as a kid, where one of my dad's friends just threw a lobster he caught into a boiling pot of water, and it screamed, and it just freaked me out, and I was like, oh, he's just suffering in there, it's terrible. So like, it made me feel like all animals have some sort of consciousness. Like, it might not be some awareness that we understand, but it's there in some capacity, and we don't know what they're experiencing.
Sure, I mean, you talk to a dog, you give it commands, it responds to those commands. So of course they have consciousness, and you can hurt them and they get sad. So yeah.
So to tie into our previous episode on religion and spirituality, I think that mysticism has had a lot to say about consciousness, for thousands of years. And, it's interesting because I was studying the works of PhD physicist John Hagelin, and he studies quantum physics. He has this really interesting debate on where consciousness comes from, and he suggests that it comes from the unified field. And that ties into mysticism, so it's an interesting subject, and there's a lot that we could say about it.
Yes, and I believe the saying is that quantum physics answers problems that religion and spirituality cannot. So I'm also equally fascinated, but from more of that perspective. So I love this of our relationship, that we come at things from a different angle, because I think it helps us have a much better, more comprehensive conversation and understanding about these issues.
Absolutely.
And the fun of this is that people have been debating it for forever, People have sat around campfires going, what is consciousness? What are we? What does it mean to have a soul? Is there a soul? So I love this.
Yeah, and I think in our age where artificial intelligence is coming along so quickly, this is a subject we're all starting to think about more collectively.
Yes.
Well, great.
If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe for more unconventional news stories like this. Thanks for watching. I'm Brigida.